Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to take a look at the question of whether or not the new TVA comics are canon to the MCU. And of course, everyone's asking the question after issue number 3 and the massive bombshell that it provided. So, there will be spoilers for both the TVA comics and the Kahhori comic, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. So we're entering a new month, and thus we have a new contest. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment, and you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And I'll announce the February winners in the next video. Also, we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so to talk about this topic, we have to go back to where it all began, and that is the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Volume 1, Issue number 5 from 2008. So one of the things this handbook included is a list of all of the universes that are part of the comic multiverse. And notice down in the lower right-hand corner, I'll zoom in so you can see it better, there is the infamous Earth 1999-99, and it lists the Iron Man movie, because that was the only movie that had come out in the MCU at that point, as part of the comic multiverse. Now, whether this was done in conjunction with Kevin Feige and his team, it's unclear, but it really doesn't matter. At this point, it is the comics saying that the MCU is part of the comic multiverse. That's really important. Okay, we've then seen over time that they have reinforced that point. Young Avengers Volume 2, Issue number 8 from 2013. It includes a storyline with Kid Loki, who is listed as being from Earth 616. That is the universe designation for the comic universe, Earth 616. Notice Kid Loki, he decides to take, a visit around the multiverse. And in fact, we see where he has stamped all the different universes he visited, which includes 1999-99, and even gives the date that he showed up there. So here we see reinforced that the MCU is part of the comic multiverse. We see it again in S.H.I.E.L.D. Volume 3, Issue number 10 from 2015. Howard the Duck sees a bunch of his variants around the multiverse, and we'll focus on these two down in the corner. Notice the one on the right, that is most definitely the Howard the Duck from the infamous Howard the Duck movie, making that canon to the comic multiverse. And on the left, that is absolutely the Howard the Duck from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. In fact, you can even see the broken glass where he was able to escape from the Collector. So again, it is crystal clear that the MCU is part of the comic multiverse. And then things, of course, got really interesting during Across the Spider-Verse, which came out in 2023, when Miguel famously said, and don't even get me started on Doctor Strange and that little nerd back on Earth 1999-99. And of course, he's referring to the events of No Way Home. And it's important to remember, Across the Spider-Verse connects to everything practically. Obviously to the MCU, to the Sony Spider-Man movies, the games, the animated shows, even the Lego universe. So this was a massive connection across the multiverse to all of these different universes. So I could definitely go on for hours talking about how the MCU is connected to the comic multiverse, but instead I'm going to direct you to a couple different areas on the Discord for this channel. Notice that Hunter has covered all of the evidence for how they're all tied together. He does a great job. Also, I want to give a shout out to the Canoners Loadout Discord, and in particular to this single multiverse chat where everyone is talking about how they're all tied together. The comics, the MCU, etc. You can see Rachel, Marlon, Luke, etc. Fantastic Discord if you want this type of information. So that does raise the question, though, has the MCU ever returned the favor and referred to the comics universe? Well, there is this really cool Easter egg from Loki Season 1, where we have the Thanos helicopter showing up in the void, and sure enough, that thing did first appear in Spidey Super Stories, which is a universe that's part of the comic multiverse. Now, you could certainly argue this is just a clever little wink and a nod and not really a connection, but it is really worth noting. However, things really got interesting with the release of the Kahhori comic, Reshaper of Worlds, in late 2024. So if you check out this comic, it's only one issue, but notice in the foreword, they are crystal clear that this is the same Kahhori that appeared in What If Season 2. I'm not going to read everything here, but if you were to read it, you would see it is absolutely the same Kahhori. And presumably after this comic, she then appeared in What If Season 3. So it's a really interesting comic. You should check it out. Loki is the main villain, and at one point, she ends up going to Earth 616, which again is the comic universe. It's the comic universe 616. And while she's there, she runs into Daredevil, Echo, Moon Knight, just all kinds of fun. So pretty much this is a good example, in fact, a crystal clear example, that the MCU characters, Kahhori, are appearing in the same multiverse as the comics. All right, so now we can finally get to the main topic, and that is the TVA comic. So issue number 1 came out in late 2024, and you can see from the cover here, there's lots of familiar characters from the Loki series, B-15, Miss Minutes, OB, Mobius, etc. We can also see Captain Carter, Spider-Gwen, there's even a variant of Gambit, so lots of very interesting characters. And it once again has a foreword that makes it crystal clear that these are the same characters from Loki Season 1 and Season 2. I'm not going to read all this, but it makes it very, very clear, and in fact, the comic itself doubles down on that because we have Miss Minutes saying, because we used to prune entire timelines in the name of one sacred timeline. But then your buddy, referring to Loki, figured out that the timekeepers, the ones calling the shots, weren't real. And then she says that same buddy destroyed the temporal loom, freeing every timeline, and then B-15 let people decide to leave or stay. It's a mess. So yeah, there's no doubt, right? This is the same TVA, the same characters we saw in Loki Season 1 and Season 2. So one of the reasons this is really important is, if the TVA comic is canon to the MCU, then it can tell us things about the MCU. For example, in issue number 1, they're having trouble with the different timelines, and OB says, well, it could be an incursion, timelines getting tangled. So that's the first time we've heard that timelines getting tangled could cause an incursion, but it certainly makes sense, right? But this is even more interesting. Mobius says, but the timelines are free and safe. Loki, well, whatever Loki did, he made sure the timelines were all in working order, and I would bet my last dollar that incursions aren't the culprit. Okay, so that would tell us that the only reason we aren't having incursions in Loki's tree is because he is keeping the timelines from getting tangled. He's keeping them safe. That is really interesting. Of course, we can't rely on that information if this isn't the same TVA, but it sure seems like it is from everything we're seeing. So, okay, let's keep that in mind as we now go to issue number 3. Yes, the infamous issue. So this just came out, just hit the stands. And at the very end of the issue, in the last panel, we see that the TVA is keeping the Scarlet Witch in stasis in the basement. What is going on, right? And it is definitely the same Scarlet Witch, right? She's got the same outfit on. Even her fingers are blackened from using the Darkhold. So what are they trying to tell us here? Everybody wants to know. Well, one thing they could be trying to tell us is, remember, in Deadpool and Wolverine, we literally saw the statue of the Scarlet Witch, which was in Mount Wundagore, but it showed up in the Void, and it was in the hideout where X-23 and Blade and Elektra were all hanging out. Well, does that mean that the TVA pruned, I guess, the end of Multiverse of Madness? So basically, that's how the statue from Mount Wundagore showed up in the Void, and that's how the TVA got a hold of the Scarlet Witch? Oh my word. I mean, that is a massive revelation if that's the case. So we got some very, very important information during the official MCU podcast when they interviewed Katharyn Blair, who is the writer for the comic, but also she worked on Loki Season 2, and this interview was back in mid-December. So check it out if you want. In fact, go to 1250 on the podcast, and that's where this interview starts up. So Katharyn is asked, TVA, referring to the comic, is really special because it connects directly to the MCU. Can you share how? So Katharyn says it connects to the MCU because the TVA has its origins in the comics, obviously. It's in Thor, it's in Fantastic Four, but it really became a thing in the MCU. So it feels like that's the place where it kind of fleshed itself out. And she's right. The TVA really came on its own in Loki Season 1 and Loki Season 2. She then says, so we're taking that TVA and putting it kind of back in its comic space where it was born, which is really cool. So that's where it connects. But it's definitely a comic-centric TVA right now in this iteration. Interesting. Okay, she then goes on to say, like, this is my comic interpretation of what's happening after Loki made his sacrifice. So I do have a lot of knowledge about this place, and I'm taking all of my Loki Season 2 experience and pouring it into this new comic iteration of the TVA. So 3 times she said comic-centric, comic interpretation, comic iteration. We have to decide what to do with that, because that is very important information. So then she sums it up by saying it's a kind of funny, in-between, awesome space. I might also add a bit confusing, but anyway, I think she tried her best to clarify. Then let's look at what the TVA artist recently said on Instagram, like just yesterday. Literally, he said, okay, I think I must clarify this. The Scarlet Witch that appears in our TVA book is not the MCU Wanda. Wow, that's big. He says that's a very similar variant. Please check out our next issues of the book for further information. I'm sorry if I brought any confusion with my previous post, which has now been taken down to avoid more confusion. So that was me putting my foot in my mouth, as I do most of the time. MCU and Marvel Comics are not the same thing. Wow. Okay. So we now both have the writer and the artist telling us this is a comic interpretation of the TVA, and basically it's not the same TVA as the MCU. Oh man, what do we do with all this? Okay, I actually think I have the answer. So, we know that there is a universe, the MCU, that has Loki season 1 and season 2, and of course all of the MCU in it. All right, we know that, right? And we know that the comics have a universe, and they made it crystal clear that the same characters that are in the Loki season 1 and season 2 are in the comics, but then they also said it's not the same. So what do we do with this? This is what I think the answer is. I think there are two universes that have the same events happening in them, basically what we're seeing in the MCU. It's when we put the universe numbers with them that it all makes sense. So there is a MCU universe, 1999-99, that is tying in with the comic universe, which is 616, and then there is a separate MCU universe, which is 616. This actually makes a lot of sense because it explains why Feige has no issue with his MCU being 616 versus there being a 1999-99 that connects directly with the comics. So here's the key. We have two universes that are basically the same, but 1999-99 is part of the comic multiverse, and 616 is part of a separate multiverse. Now, collectively, they might be part of an omniverse, right? This even bigger structure out there. That could make sense. But the key is they have to have two different universes representing the MCU. Otherwise, these statements wouldn't make sense, right? Remember, it's my comic interpretation, a comic-centric TVA right now in this iteration. This new comic iteration of the TVA and the MCU and Marvel Comics are not the same thing. There's just no other way to make those statements work, but also have a situation where clearly a universe, 1999-99, that has everything in the MCU in it is part of the comic multiverse. There's just no other way around it. So the good news is we are going to get more clarity on this in the days to come. The artist himself said that issues number 4 and number 5 will help explain things more. In fact, notice Scarlet Witch is literally on the cover of issue number 5. Also, Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars will be coming out in the years to come, and I am certain that Wanda will be in either or both of those two movies. So we will get more clarity on how this all ties together. But in the meantime, this is the model that I think makes sense. There is a 1999-99 universe that represents the MCU, and a 616 universe that represents the MCU. And the 1999-99 is the one that is part of the comic multiverse, and that is separate from the MCU multiverse. I just don't know how else to make all these different statements from the writer and artist work. But I want to know what you all are thinking about this. I mean, do you think there's two separate MCU universes, or do you have other ways to solve this, admittedly, very confusing situation? You know I love to read and respond to everything, so leave your comments. I can't wait to see what you think. So don't forget, March contest, be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook, and there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And then earlier I mentioned our Discord. We have 2,000 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I will leave a pinned comment so you can be part of it. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.